Please note that the views expressed on this program are those of the individuals who speak them, and not necessarily those of Portsmouth Community Radio, its Board of Trustees, members, volunteers, or underwriters. Good evening and welcome to Spirit Radio. I am your host, Willy Hassell. Along with my co-host, Lynn Nickerson, we will take you on a journey into the unknown where the paranormal becomes the normal. A journey to a world cloaked in darkness where reality becomes a thin veil. So sit back, relax, and join us as we venture into the shadows, the darkness, the unknown, and back. And good evening once again, and welcome to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. This is the show where the paranormal becomes the normal. I am your host, Willy Hassell, your gatekeeper to the dark side, your guide to the realm of the unknown, the unseen, the unthinkable. And yes, there she is. She is the lovely. She is the mystical. She is the mysterious. She is Lynn Nickerson. Good evening, Lynn.
Good evening, Willie. How are you doing?
I'm doing good tonight. How are you doing?
Great.
Great. Did you enjoy this beautiful day today?
Yeah, it was very nice. But I was looking forward to tonight all day long. Because we're planning on talking about haunted lighthouses.
Yeah, I've been looking forward tonight all week long.
Because, yeah, secretly me too.
Yeah. So, this is not a repeat. This is not a repeat.
This is going to be more information. Yep.
Because Jeremy D'Entremont was our scheduled guest for last week, and he was feeling a little bit under the weather, so he wasn't able to come in. But he was very gracious to say that he happened to be available once again tonight.
And we were very pleased.
And so, in case you got the intro last week that Jeremy D'Entremont was going to be here. No, he wasn't here last week. He's here tonight.
He was here in spirit, though.
He was here in spirit? Not in a ghostly spirit, I hope.
In a manner of speaking.
In a matter of speaking? Okay. So, without further ado,
let's introduce Jeremy.
Whatever that stuff is. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome back to the show Jeremy D'Entremont.
Hi, and Willie.
Hi, Jeremy. Welcome
back. So much for
back.
having me. Very nice to be here. And I have to say, it was something paranormal happened to me last week. That's my only excuse, but thank you.
That's a good excuse.
It was paranormal.
That's
okay.
acceptable.
Yeah. Won't go into any detail, though. Something paranormal happened to my insides, but that's okay. But thank you so much for having me tonight.
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So anyway, Jeremy is the author of more than a dozen books on New England lighthouses and folklore. He is the historian for the American Lighthouse Foundation. Let me see, where am I at? He is also the founder of the Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses and Expects Paranormal Journeys. And he is joining us tonight this is his third appearance on the show, with some more great tales of haunted lighthouses on the New England coast. And it's always a pleasure to have you here, Jeremy.
Yeah, always a pleasure to be here.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
So the American Lighthouse Association, their primary focus is renovating the houses, right? The lighthouses.
The American Lighthouse Foundation is a nonprofit organization that actually takes care of 20 different lighthouses in the Northeast. What's been happening is, I know we're going to talk about ghost stories and not about lighthouse preservation, but there's a lot to talk about with lighthouse preservation, and sometimes those topics can overlap a bit. But the government has been gradually getting out of the business of taking care of the lighthouse structures. The Coast Guard still maintains the lights in most lighthouses for navigation. Most of them are still activated to navigation. And people always say, well, everybody has GPS and everything. They don't need lighthouses anymore, right? Well, that's true to some extent, but GPS can fail.
That's right.
Even with GPS, it doesn't hurt to have
Backup
something visible in the water, like lighthouses and buoys and so forth, that mariners can see, and it helps confirm their position. So anyway, the Coast Guard still maintains the lights, but they're finding other owners for the lighthouses. So they've been, for a number of years now, they've been giving away lighthouses to suitable nonprofit organizations, sometimes community governments, things like that. If nobody applies for a lighthouse, or if they don't like any of the applications they get, they're auctioning some of them to the general public. And this has happened. It's happening currently with some lighthouses, as a matter of fact.
So you're saying that if there isn't an auction, the first option is to give them away to a nonprofit,
right?
Where it would be operated under the auspices of this nonprofit.
Right, within certain guidelines. But to get back to your original question, what is the American Lighthouse Foundation? The American Lighthouse Foundation, again, takes care of about 20 different lighthouses, some of which are owned by the foundation. Some of them are license or lease agreements. So there's a variety of different types of agreements. But they are being gradually transferred. The ownership is actually being transferred to various.
And are there certain stipulations of what can be done to these buildings, like no real modifications? Is there some kind of stipulation
they have to adhere to certain preservation guidelines, like federal standards. Yeah. They're not supposed to change the exterior appearance of a lighthouse, because that's part of the aid to navigation, is the way it looks during the day.
So they couldn't paint it like purple and orange stripes or something?
Well, I do know of one lighthouse, a private owner, who's done a fantastic job. In fact, it's one that's got ghost stories. Maybe it's one we can talk about tonight. Right. It's called Borden Flats Light down in Fall River, Mass. Oh. And the owner is a young guy in his early 30s. His name is Nick Korstad, and he's done a fantastic job there. And it was a fairly plain white lighthouse out in the water at the mouth of the Taunton River in Fall River, and it was just a white lighthouse surrounded by a caisson, which is the base. Not that exciting to look at, but he put a red stripe around the tower, which actually looks really good, and he got an okay from the Coast Guard to do that. So there are exceptions to what I was saying, that you can't change the appearance, but he got an okay for that, and it looks really sharp, I think. With that,
and what kind of a
stripe.
Tower is it? What kind of a structure is
it's
that?
It's a white cast iron tower. I think about the tower itself is probably about 50 feet tall, and again, it's got this the bottom part. Some people listening may know what I mean when I say a spark plug type light. It kind of looks like a spark plug.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just sticking out in the water, completely surrounded by water. But in this case, the base that the lighthouse stands on was enlarged after the hurricane of 1938, did a lot of damage, and the lighthouse actually has a bit of a tilt to it because of the hurricane. So the base, the caisson, had an extra section built around it to kind of protect the lighthouse some more. So it's fairly unique looking.
And it's not on an island, right? It's on the mainland in Taunton.
No, it's out in the water. It's out in the middle of the water. It's completely surrounded by water. So you can stay overnight there, but you have to Nick will pick you up by boat and get you out to the lighthouse.
So it does have a little landing dock.
No, it just has a ladder. I've actually I
drop you from a plane.
I don't know if this is one we plan to talk about, but we can certainly talk about it. But I actually spent most of a night at Borden Flats Lighthouse with New England Ghost Project. Ron Kolek and his group 2 years ago. We spent most of a night out there investigating, because Nick, the owner, had lots of experiences out there. But we had to climb out of a little boat up a ladder up the side of the lighthouse. That's how you have to get in. So he has overnight stays there. He's furnished it beautifully, but it's not for everybody, because it does take a little physical
of effort to get there. Huh?
It does, yeah.
Well, so can you briefly tell us what kind of events happen?
Sure. Nick started, he was spending a lot of time there. He was actually living in the lighthouse for a while. He's not living in it full time anymore, but he had various family members and friends helping him to renovate the building. So he was out there a lot, doing a lot of painting and stuff. And he and several of his family and friends, including, I believe, a brother, one of the common things they heard was it sounded like a man whistling. And there was nobody there, and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And they heard that a lot. And they also heard a little girl's voice a number of times, either talking or laughing. And one time Nick said he was there by himself painting on the deck outside the lighthouse, and he heard a little girl's voice in his ear, like she was right there in his ear, and she said, "Those colors are pretty."
Oh my God.
And he said it was clear as anything. And they also sometimes hear music. It sounds like old-timey music. He says that there's no boats around, nobody in sight, and it doesn't seem to have any source. It seems to be coming, from the lighthouse, but can't figure out where it's coming from. So his brother, I think I'm remembering this right, that it was his brother, he told me, was so freaked out by the stuff he was experiencing out there that he will not go back to the lighthouse again.
You said you investigated out
We
there.
did, yeah. New England Ghost Project. I know, Willie, you know Ron Kolek, and I think you know Leslie Martin,
yes,
who's works with them sometimes.
Excuse me.
Leslie's been on the show, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it was Ron and Leslie and Karen Ruck. I don't know if you know her, another member of New England Ghost Project, but
I know the name. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I've met her or not.
So we didn't spend the entire night, but we were there until I think it was at least 1 a.m. or maybe it was 2 a.m., something like that. And it was very interesting. Leslie and Karen both. Karen doesn't consider herself psychic, but she seems to be somewhat intuitive. Leslie Martin is a psychic medium, or trance medium. Well, not so much a trance medium, I guess
she's
in her
just a
case.
psychic
Yeah, she
medium.
would call herself a psychic medium. Author of the book Medium Rare,
That's
great
right.
book. Yeah.
Rare, yes.
And both she and Karen kept getting an image of a man with a mustache and like a captain's hat, and they both drew separately from each other. They both drew a picture of this man. And Leslie also, very early in the night, she didn't know homework. She never does. She never wants to know anything in advance. And she said, I'm thinking, I keep getting like the French name, Jean-Paul. She kept saying, Jean-Paul, Jean-Paul. And she said, don't tell me anything. She didn't want to know that, right away if what she was getting made sense or not. But what I didn't tell her until later was that one of the longtime keepers of that lighthouse was named John Paul, not Jean Paul, but John, was his first name. Paul was his last name, John Paul. And he looked very much like the person that they both drew. And I actually had a photograph of him with me. But I totally believe them that they did absolutely no homework before going there. So it was very interesting.
That's fantastic.
And probably the climax of the night was very late, around midnight. After midnight, we were all on the second level of the lighthouse. Or actually, I think we're on the third level, but that's not important. But anyway, we were sitting around on the floor, and I think Ron and Karen were trying different types of dowsing with a pendulum and dowsing rods, that type of thing. But then we thought we heard footsteps above us, and there was nobody up there. It sounded like somebody was walking around up there. So Leslie and Ron and Karen all went upstairs to investigate that. I stayed down below with Nick, the owner. And Nick and I are sitting on the floor in the dark in this one level while everybody else was upstairs. And Ron had his, what do you call that thing? The hack shack?
The hack shack.
Hack shack, yeah, that cycles through radio frequencies.
Yeah.
And the idea is that sometimes you might get snippets that will answer a question or sound, put words together.
They supposedly you can... It cycles through different frequencies so fast that you couldn't actually get a full word out of any one frequency.
Right.
So if you do get words out of it, then it's coming from somewhere else.
Right. That's the idea. I'm not sure how big a believer I am. I haven't seen
I'm not either.
any great results from that personally, but I will tell you that night that was going while Nick and I were sitting there on the floor, and as we're sitting there, Nick said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "A light just shot across the floor. It seemed to come from nowhere," and he couldn't figure out what it was. And seconds after he said, "Did you see that?" and he said there was a light across the floor, there was like a bang on the opposite side of the room that seemed to, have no source that we could figure out. And a moment after that, the shack hack thing said, "Protect your home," very clearly. It was all gibberish up to that point, but at that point, very clearly it said, "Protect your home," and then went back to gibberish.
Oh.
So that all happened within a few seconds. It was very interesting. And then
Yeah, three different things all at once to
Right.
Yeah,
to
the light, the bang,
corroborate
and-
each other. Yeah.
And then Ron, Leslie, and Karen came down from upstairs and said that while they were investigating up there, all three of them heard very distinctly a male groan, like a man was groaning up there, like he was in pain or something.
All right, hold it right there. We've got an underwriting announcement. We'll get right back to that. Programming on Portsmouth Community Radio is made possible by you, our members, and by the Music Hall, an American treasure for the arts. It's the Seacoast Performing Arts Center that entertains 100,000 patrons annually, located on Chestnut Street in Portsmouth. Schedule and other information can be found at themusichall.org.
Okay. And
Now-
that pays the light bill for another 10 minutes.
So that groan, do you suppose that has anything to do with what might have happened to the lighthouse keeper's demise?
John Paul didn't die there. He went on to another lighthouse. Interestingly, though, another thing Leslie Martin picked up that night was she kept getting pains like in her abdomen, and she does that a lot. She considers herself
Feels it in her
empathic.
stomach,
She
or-
feels,
yeah.
pains that are related to things people have felt in the past. I've seen her do this a few times. And so she felt severe pain in her abdomen, and it turns out that another keeper there, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but had severe appendicitis. He didn't die of it, though. He was taken for emergency, help to a hospital and recovered from it. But it was just very interesting that is in the record as happening there, and she picked up on that. So the groaning, who knows? Maybe it related to that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it could have been, just in pain from the appendicitis.
that's pretty good confirmation. Yeah, a lot of tragic stuff happens. All right then, moving farther north.
The north.
Farther north, or maybe farther south, let me see. It would be farther north from Fall River
Yeah.
to Boston.
Boston.
Yes, we want to know what's going on in Boston Harbor.
Okay. There's a lot of things going on in Boston Harbor. I was actually just in outer Boston Harbor the other night. I did a sunset cruise from Scituate and went by Boston Light, which is currently being restored in preparation for its 300th birthday in 2016. It's the oldest light station in America. And the first two keepers of Boston Light drowned, interestingly enough. So I don't know if we want to get into that too much, but I think I've talked about that with you before. The first keeper, George Worthy Lake, first lighthouse keeper in North America, drowned on the job 2 years after taking the job.
That's not a
And I
very
mean-
good start to the profession.
No, and then
is it?
his replacement drowned 2 weeks later.
Oh
so-
my gosh!
Yeah.
Was it storm related?
No, actually. The second case is, I don't really know the details, and nobody seems to have a lot of detail, but George Worthy Lake drowned with 5 other people, including his wife and daughter, when a canoe capsized when they were transferring from a larger vessel to the island. It was being paddled by a slave who lived at the island with them.
I
and
remember
he
you talking about that.
Yeah, so they have
Very
a
tragic.
lot of stories of strange happenings out at Boston Light that are usually attributed to Old George, meaning the first keeper. But I know you and I were before the show. We're talking a little bit about the Lady in Black. I think you might want
Yes.
to touch on that.
I would love to hear it
Let's do that.
as our listening audience would.
It's I would say the Lady in Black, maybe New England's best known ghost story.
Is it really?
If not,
Well, the
it's
Alza
up-
Shoals have a
it's-
few good ones.
The
but-
Alza Shoals do have a few
Yeah.
good ones. Ocean-born Mary in New Hampshire is pretty famous too, and
Yeah.
that, maybe you want to talk about that. I actually wrote a book about that. But yeah, the Lady in Black is a very famous story, made famous especially by Edward Rowe Snow, and I'm sure some people listening remember Edward Rowe Snow.
He's a distant relative. I have another one. One of his
Is he a distant relative?
yeah,
or what?
one of his families was a Nickerson.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Right.
I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time, but I used to know about his genealogy, and it seems to me I do remember Nickerson's in
Yep,
there. Yeah.
family Nickerson.
He was my hero as a kid. Growing up in Lynn, Massachusetts, I would see Edward Rowe Snow on radio and TV telling stories
really?
of the New England coast and pirates and treasure and shipwrecks. And,
He played Santa Claus.
he was also the flying Santa to
That's
lighthouses
right.
for more than 40 years. Yeah, and that's a tradition that still goes on. Don't get me started on that because I'm
Okay.
very personally involved in that. That's quite a topic in itself. But Edward Rowe Snow just, to me, brought to life all those great stories that make New England so interesting, and that includes ghost stories and shipwrecks and pirates and treasure and all kinds of things. He wrote over 40 full-length books and a lot of shorter ones, and was just a major media personality in his time. He died in 1982.
Yeah,
I
it
got
was
to meet him a
recent.
couple of times, and his daughter is a good friend, and I got to annotate 7 new editions of his books some years ago.
7?
Yeah.
Wow.
7 different books. Yeah, I see you have Lighthouses of New England here.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love it. Very interesting, full of history, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. And The Lady in Black is a story he wrote about in several of his books, and it's a story he used to tell often. And he used to give tours at Fort Warren in Boston Harbor. Fort Warren is on George's Island. It's a Civil War era fort that was used as a prison for Confederate prisoners during
That's
the Civil
the
War.
creepy part.
Yeah. Would you like me to tell the Lady in Black story as it's
Yes,
usually
please.
told?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Various versions of it some will be quite embellished, so I won't do an overly embellished version. But basically the story as it's usually told is that during the Civil War, and again, it is an absolute fact that Fort Warren was a prison for Confederate prisoners. Even the vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, was one of the prisoners there. So anyway, the story goes that this young officer, and the name is sometimes given as Andrew Lanier, that he was captured and imprisoned at Fort Warren. And he was in an area that Edward Rowe Snow used to call the Corridor of Dungeons, this one section of the fort where some of the men were imprisoned. And a bunch of them were in this one area together. And Andrew Lanier had a young wife back home named Melanie. And they say that Melanie came north and found Southern sympathizers, and they decided that they were going to spring or rescue her husband from the prison
And what was he there for?
for being a Confederate in the Civil War. Basically, he was a
that's
prisoner of
all?
war. Yeah, I mean, that's what they did.
Yeah.
If somebody wasn't killed in battle, they would capture them and they'd put them in prison like that. So Melanie plotted with this group of Southern sympathizers to get her husband out of prison. And the story goes that she went there by herself. They got her to a certain point on land, as close as they could get her, and she rowed a small boat out to the island in the middle of the night. And she was dressed in men's clothing, they say. And she got onto the island, snuck by the guards and everything, and got to near the prison, near the fort. And she whistled a favorite tune that her husband and she, both knew. And he whistled it back to her, and they made that connection. And so she was able to figure out where her husband was exactly. And they were able to get, I think they tied clothes together or bed sheets. Again, this is the story as it's usually told. I'm not guaranteeing that any of this is true, but they lowered sheets or whatever it was, and she was able to climb up. And because she was very small, she was able to fit through the small opening that the men were not able to fit through. So she got inside the cell with these men. But then, so now she's in prison with them, so that didn't really solve anything. So they decided that they were going to dig their way out into the parade ground in the fort, outdoors, and escape from. And then she had a gun with her, so they decided that they would use the gun, shoot the guard, and escape from there. So they tunneled out under the fort. I'm not sure with their hands or what they used exactly, but somehow they dug this tunnel. And when they eventually got out, dug the complete tunnel and came out on the parade ground, they came out in the middle of the night, and a guard saw them and shot at them. And Melanie tried to fire back, and her gun misfired. And this story goes that the gun kind of exploded, and a piece of it struck her husband and killed her husband. So she accidentally killed her own husband, and then she was captured. And she was sentenced to be hanged as a spy. And they say that before she was swung out into eternity, is how Edward Rowe Snow used to say it, she was asked, "What is your dying wish? What is your last wish?" And she said she wished to be hanged and buried in women's clothing rather than the men's clothes she was wearing. So they found a women's robe or dress, like a long black dress that was used in a theatrical production, and she wore that, and she was hanged and buried. And ever since then, the ghost of the Lady in Black has been supposedly seen and heard by many people at Fort Warren. Now, it's a
That
very
gives me chills.
it's a great story, and Edward Rowe Snow was great at telling it. But again, it's one of those things. There's no record. People have researched it. People have found no record of any of that happening, and no record of anybody named Andrew Lanier imprisoned there. No Melanie Lanier. No woman ever imprisoned or executed at Fort Warren. There's absolutely no record of it. But I will tell you that, number one, I used to know a man who was a longtime caretaker at Fort Warren. His name was Joe Boudreau. He has since passed away, but he was the caretaker there for like 25 years, and he knew Edward Rowe Snow well. And Joe Boudreau absolutely, firmly believed the place was haunted. He used to hear a blood-curdling woman's scream on numerous occasions. He said one time he was doing the dishes in the sink, and he heard the scream and dropped the dishes, smashed the dishes in the sink because it was so startling. Another time he had some federal agents out there with somebody who was under witness protection, and they were actually brought him out to George's Island to protect this person somewhere where nobody would find him. Mm-hmm. So these agents were out there with this prisoner, this witness, and in the middle of the night, they were staying in the same building as Joe Boudreau, the caretaker, and in the middle of the night, there was this blood-curdling woman's scream. And then there was no woman on the island. And Joe Boudreau said that all these tough professional federal agents all came running out of their rooms with their guns drawn, and the dogs they had, their guard dogs, were barking like crazy when the scream happened. And, they were all trying to figure out where it was coming from. And Joe told them, well, I've heard this several other times. So it apparently is the ghost of the island. So he actually had them sign an affidavit to prove that he wasn't the only one who was hearing this thing.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Another interesting thing quickly to add to that is that a few years ago, I found a newspaper on eBay that I bought. And it has a clipping. It's from the Civil War era. The newspaper actually came out, I think, 1863 or 4, right around there. Mm-hmm. And the news story, it's fairly short, but it says that soldiers at Fort Warren were reporting seeing a ghostly woman in the fort. An old woman, it was described as. An old woman, not a young woman like Melanie is usually described. But an old woman, and they were so alarmed by this that some of the guards were shooting at her. And the article said that it was the common belief that this was a former owner of the island, the ghost of a former owner of the island. So it's kind of an interesting
mix.
Side story, because the story of the Lady in Black seems to have come about later and been popularized by Edward Rowe Snow, but this shows that even during the Civil War something was happening there. So.
Well, there was a woman on the island, evidently, but exactly what her identity is.
Yeah, apparently something happened out there involving a woman.
Yeah.
Which story is accurate, something went on.
I think sometimes the story comes, the phenomena comes first, and the story comes later in somebody's attempt to try to explain it.
Yeah.
They make up a story.
What doesn't hit me is quite right is the fact that she got into the prison and then they dug. So how long did it take them to dig?
Oh, I don't know. There's, I said, you read different versions and there's different embellishments, and some of the details vary. But
what I was wondering is, she got herself into the prison, then they had to dig a tunnel out. Where was she hiding all this time? Nobody noticed there was a woman in the prison.
Did they go to lunch? Did they eat?
Right. Well, you can make up your own details, I guess, in your head. I could certainly be a good movie, I would think. You could base a movie around that.
Sure.
Yeah, if you'd have to get straight on the details.
Yeah.
But, something could have happened.
How many lighthouses are there in Boston Harbor?
Well, let's see. Presently, there are... It depends on what you consider Boston Harbor. There's only one in the inner harbor, that's Long Island Headlight at the tip of Long Island, which is, people, if they take a harbor cruise, they'll see it sticking up above the trees there. There's the old Deer Island light. The original Deer Island lighthouse, another spark plug type light, was torn down in 1982, so it's just a stick with the light on it now. And then in the outer harbor, there's Boston Light and Graves Light. So that's it. But there used to be several others that are gone now. But
I have a next-door neighbor who was in the Coast Guard, and he spent 20 years in different lighthouses. And I was just talking to him yesterday, and one of them was Boston Harbor, but I think it might have been Deer Island that he said.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm not quite sure.
You know, it's funny. As you said that, I was thinking Deer Island isn't one I usually talk about related to ghost stories, but there is kind of an interesting story connected to Deer Island.
All right. Well, why don't we save that?
Okay.
For after
We're at the bottom of the hour.
And we'll just call that a little tease. How's that sound?
Take a break and we'll come right back to Jeremy. You are listening to Spirit Radio, the paranormal experience on WSCA 106.1 FM, and we'll be right back after this short break.
Along the highway, so many people used to call this place home. Ghost towns along the highway, I guess folks they just bound to roam. But our love keeps on moving.
Okay, welcome back to Spirit Radio, the paranormal experience on WSCA 106.1 in Portsmouth, West End. And from the community calendar, the Seacoast Repertory Theater. The Seacoast Repertory Theater is dedicated to the presentation of professional theater productions and to the education of the region's young people. Ushers are needed for the main stage and youth productions on evenings and weekends. Volunteers will work with a variety of people, backgrounds, and ages. For further information, the number is 603-433-4793. And they changed that a little bit on me, so I kind of got lost there. So, do you have some upcoming guests for us?
Yeah,
Maybe?
for upcoming guests, let me see. On August 30th, joining us in the studio is going to be paranormal investigator Shane Sorois. And you want to tell us about Shane, Willie?
Well, as you said, he is a paranormal investigator, and on September 20th, he is hosting the True Paranormal Event 2014, a celebration of advanced understanding in the paranormal field. And that's going to be held at the Brookline Event Center in Brookline, New Hampshire, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And among the guests who are going to be speaking there are Paul and Ben Eno, and William Hall, who just wrote the new book just out, The Most Haunted House in the World. Is that
The
correct?
World's Most Haunted House.
Most
I know
Haunted
we
House.
keep getting that reversed.
one way or the other. It's the same house anyways.
And we're going to have a table there.
That's right. Spirit Radio will
Spirit
also
Radio will
be there.
be
So
there.
come by. Say hello.
On September 6th, Roxy Zwicker, who's a local author of many many fascinating stories on ghosts and spirit legends here of the Seacoast area, will be joining us. And this will be her second appearance on the show. September 13th. Yes, 13th. We're welcoming Brad Olson, and he's going to join us to discuss his latest series of books. He's got a couple out. It's the Esoteric series. There are two. And Willy, what did you say that was
It's
focusing
modern
on?
esoteric, and the second one is future esoteric, and it deals with UFOs and
UFOs, okay.
government stuff and all kinds of cool stuff.
Okay. On September 20th right now, we've got a surprise guest. Who do we have on the 20th?
That's Reverend Carter.
That is Reverend Carter. That's right. Okay. Hang on just a moment here. And I don't seem to have any info on Reverend Carter.
He wrote a book. I don't remember the name of it, but
it has to do with aliens mentioned in
and
Scripture.
UFOs in the Bible, yes.
Yeah. All right, so that'll be September 20th. And on the 27th, we're going to have William Hall join us. And again, it's going to be his book, The World's Most Haunted House, which is a true story of the 1974 poltergeist haunting on Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
And I've been reading the book, and it's excellent.
Pretty scary.
It's excellent, fascinating book.
Yeah, it's well done. And then October 4th, which is going to be our first anniversary show.
1 year.
1 year. And we're going to have our very first guest back on the show, and he's going to be joining us. And he'll be talking about the hotel that he owns in Napanoch, New York, which is the Shanley Hotel. So that'll be Sal Nicosia. So that about wraps it up, Willie.
That about wraps it up. Oh, I
For our
think that's
guest
pretty
list
good.
for now, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good guest list. But speaking of good guests, tonight we have him right here, Jeremy D'Entremont. And I forgot to mention, if anybody would like to call in and ask Jeremy a question, or maybe just mention something about your favorite lighthouse, the number is 603-430-9722.
Well, welcome back, Jeremy.
And you were just starting to tell us a
About
story
Deer
about
Island.
Deer Island. That's right.
Yeah, Deer Island's well, the island itself is an interesting place, but that's another story. The lighthouse is just offshore from the island, or it used to be. There used to be a fairly attractive spark plug type lighthouse there, but it was torn down by the government because it was in such bad shape in 1982. Now it's just a stick with a light on it. But the story I was going to tell was written about by Edward Rowe Snow. And I wasn't planning to talk about this, so I might not remember some of the details perfectly, but I believe it was, I'm thinking 1930s, I can't remember the exact year, and a keeper, and I think I'm remembering his name right, was Joseph McCabe, and he was about to be married, and he actually wrote wedding invitations at the lighthouse. And he was going to, sometimes at low tide, you could walk to shore across a bar. At other times, you had to go back and forth by boat. And his plan was to, after he wrote these wedding invitations, was to go to shore and mail them. And it was low tide, and he thought he was with a couple of other guys who were out there with him, and the three of them went walking on the sandbar at low tide to walk to shore to mail the invitations. Sadly, it was there were rough seas that day, and there were waves going over the bar. And he was knocked down as he was walking, and the other men tried to go to his aid, but they weren't able to, and he basically disappeared in the harbor. And
couldn't they see the waves coming?
Apparently, it probably got rough. Maybe it was a squall or something got rough in a hurry, and in any event, they couldn't save him. He was gone. I think Edward O. Snow described it more like he slipped. It's a combination of there being some waves and just losing his footing and slipping into the water, and they weren't able to save him. But in any event, he did drown, and he had his wedding invitations. I'm remembering this a little wrong. I think it was on the way back that he fell in, and he had actually mailed the wedding invitations in the meantime. So they went out, but he drowned on his way back to the lighthouse. So it's extremely sad. It's a very, very sad story. It's not to be too much of a downer, but if you research the history of any offshore lighthouse, you're almost definitely going to find at least one or more tragedies in every one of them. There was, lighthouse keeping wasn't as romantic as people think, or as much fun, or
it was precarious.
It was dangerous. It was
Darn
hard work, and it
dangerous.
didn't pay very well.
I imagine it was a dangerous
very tough job.
on a lot
But
of
the
places.
last note on that story is that I corresponded with a guy who was one of the last Coast Guard lightkeepers at Deer Island Light before they tore it down and put up the stick with the light on it. But anyway, he told me that they used to have a ghost story there. He didn't say he ever saw anything or experienced anything strange, but he said when a new guy would come on, they would kind of tease them about the ghost there. And if I remember correctly, he said the lighthouse had a little bit of a tilt, which is not uncommon for those lighthouses. And he said he'd have this new young Coast Guardsman across the table from him, and he'd have a coffee cup on the table, and it would start to actually move across the table, and he would tell the young guy it was the ghost, and he'd have him believing it. So they had some fun with that too.
Well, moving north, what else would you like to talk about? What else comes to mind?
Let's see. I've got about 35 names of about 35 lighthouses in my notes here, but I know one you and I touched on that we were saying we might want to talk about tonight is Boone Island.
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
Boone Island is a very dramatic location. It's Celia Thaxter, who was a famous New Hampshire writer who lived much of her life on the Isles of Shoals, writer and poet, called Boone Island the forlornest place that could be imagined, which I think is the perfect description.
Sums it up.
Yeah, it's just a little...
It's a rock.
It's a pile of rocks, a miserable little pile of rocks, 6 miles from the nearest point of land. I'm sure some of your listeners have been to see the Nubble Light up in York, Maine. And if you go to see the Nubble Light, or if you're along Long Sands Beach in York, you can look out in the distance and see this. It looks like a pencil sticking up there in the distance, Boone Island Lighthouse.
Yep.
Depending on the conditions, sometimes if it's...
You can see it from Fort Foster, believe it or not.
From the high, where would you have to go in Fort Foster to see it? I would think you can, yeah, if you're in the right...
You can see it.
Not on the inside, like facing the river, but more towards the
on the outer edge.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You should be able
north.
to see it.
Yep.
Yeah, I believe that.
Have you actually been out there yourself?
I've flown over it in a helicopter. I've been all around it in boats many times, but I've never actually been on the island. It's very hard to land there. Yeah. I know I have one friend who's been on the island because he goes out with the Coast Guard Auxiliary to service the light, and he says the stairs inside the lighthouse are falling apart. It's getting actually dangerous to access the light. So all that's left out there now is this tall granite lighthouse. It's 133 feet tall. It's the tallest lighthouse in New England, built in 1855, and the keeper's house is gone. It was actually... there were 2 Coast Guard guys there in the blizzard of 78. The island was underwater. They had to be rescued by helicopter, and the Coast Guard then demolished the house right after that.
Boy, they are lucky they were rescued.
They were very lucky to be alive. So it's just the lighthouse, and the lighthouse was just auctioned just a few days ago. The auction was finalized, and it was sold by the government to a private individual for $78,000. And all I can say is good luck.
Oh, yeah.
I love the history of it, but it's a daunting thing to take on a property like that.
Have to wonder if that was a good investment or not.
I know.
You know?
So
we have another quick 20 seconds here. Don't anybody go anywhere.
And another
Stick
announcement.
right by your radio.
Programming on Portsmouth Community Radio is brought to you by our members and by Davies Tire, providing professional auto repair and a full line of Nokian tires, with 2 locations to serve you, Islington Street and Banfield Road in Portsmouth. Discounts available online at daviestire.com. Davies Tire keeps you rolling right.
Okay. So that's
We're
that.
back.
We're back.
So the reason we brought up Boone, hard for me to say, was because of the history there. And there was a shipwreck before, and probably part of the reason that Boone was built.
Absolutely.
So if you could tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, there were a number of shipwrecks there. It's a very dangerous spot, and it's right in shipping channels. But the most famous shipwreck that ever happened there was the Nottingham Galley in December of 1710. It was a British ship. The captain was John Dean, and there were 14 men on the ship altogether. And they stopped in Ireland and picked up some goods. They had cheese and rope on board. They were bringing over to bring to Boston. and they got over to the New England coast, and they arrived at the coast pretty far north, up the southern Maine coast, and they were going down the coast toward Boston, and they were caught in a storm this one night, December 1710, and a sleet storm. So it was very icy, and it was in the wee hours of the morning. It was after midnight, and the ship hit one of the ledges that extends from Boone Island, and the ship basically broke apart and was wrecked. But the men all managed to kind of jump off the ship onto the island, and they all survived, which is kind of a miracle. So nobody died in the initial wreck. All 14 men got onto the island, and as it turned out, out of 14 men, 2 of them died on the island. 2 of them died trying to get to shore in a makeshift raft a few days after the wreck. And the other 10 men survived about a month on the island with basically no food and no shelter.
Provisions.
They were able to salvage a little bit of canvas from the sails of the ship, and they all huddled and wrapped what they could around them. But that's all they had. They killed 1 seagull. They got a few mussels out of the ocean to eat. But other than that, they basically had no food. And I'm sure some people listening probably know the whole story. The ones who survived did resort to extraordinary measures. They did make use of one of the men who died on the island. And I've heard cruise narration, like, scenic cruises in the area. I've heard some people announce that it was the ship's cook that they ate. I think some people tend to think that's some sort of a joke or something, but actually it was not. It was the ship's carpenter. It was not the ship's cook.
Was the carpenter?
Yeah, it was.
There was no way of getting any word to the mainland that they were there.
Exactly. They were within sight of the mainland. They could see the mainland.
But you can't yell that far.
They had no way of getting there. And what happened was that these 2 men put together a tiny little raft that they tried to get to shore, and they died doing that. And they were found on shore by somebody, and that alerted somebody to the fact that there might be others out there.
Yeah.
And that's why they went out searching, and they eventually found them and rescued them. But the men were, imagine the sight these men were after being on this island for a month. They said they looked like skeletons.
In December.
Yeah, through brutal weather. So they were barely alive when they were found. But there's a lot more to the story, too. And there's actually there was a novel based on it,
Really?
Boone Island, by Kenneth Roberts. In the 50s, it was a bestseller. It's a really good novel. It's very entertaining, but it's not very accurate, apparently. He kind of used John Dean, the captain's own story that he wrote as a main source, and Dean kind of painted himself to be a hero. But the first mate wrote his account. He made Dean out to be a villain. But most people believed Dean back in those days. But there's a new book out that's kind of a revisionist look at it. It's co-written by Stephen Erickson of Portsmouth. And it's called Boone Island, and it's basically the true story behind it all, and I highly recommend it.
But how did they get the facts verified when I'm sure the log didn't...
Stephen spent quite a bit of time in England and did a lot of research on John Dean, and I think he put together a pretty good case that Dean was really involved in smuggling and was a kind of a nefarious character. And it's debatable whether or not he wrecked the ship on purpose for insurance money, but other than that, he was not a hero, and he didn't behave heroically apparently during the whole episode. So I recommend, if people are interested in that story, I highly recommend that the recent book Boone Island.
They never found the captain's log, did they?
No, all there was his
think.
own version of what that he wrote afterwards.
Yeah.
Which may not be that factual.
A bit of conjecture, I would imagine. But
yeah, or his side of the story, basically.
How large a boat was it? Was it a schooner?
No, it wasn't a schooner. It was
only 14 men on board.
I'm trying to think of how big it was. I off the top of my head. Here's
Like
my book on Maine
Gallatin
shipwrecks.
Oh yeah, that's a good source.
Let's look it up. Yeah. But anyway, as I look that up, I'll add that the lighthouse keepers and later the Coast Guard crews who lived on the Boone Island Lighthouse had plenty of weird experiences there. I mean, there's a lot of ghost stories.
Do you know what some of them are? Did they ever see people crawling up on the rocks? Or?
First of all, the Nottingham Galley was a small vessel, 120 tons with 10 guns. So it was a fairly small ship. Nothing real big at all.
In feet? How many feet?
Not sure. I'm not sure.
I'm just wondering, why the heck were they sailing in a smaller ship from, the United States to
Well, I
England
think
and back?
a lot of small to medium-sized ships came over, successfully, and some not so successfully.
Well, in the winter, it's just such deadly weather. I don't know how they risk it.
Mm-hmm.
It's fodder for a good ghost story.
Yeah, but anyway, one story I'll tell you that I was told firsthand by a Coast Guardsman. His name was Bob Roberts, and he was stationed on Boone Island in the early 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And he said when he first showed up there, one of the other Coast Guard guys said to him, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And he laughed. He thought it was a big joke. And the guy said, "You're not going to be laughing for long after you live here for a while." And Bob said that he truly believed that after a while that the place was haunted. And he said when he would go out to tend the fog signal at night, he thought somebody was watching him. It always felt like that. And once he and the other crewmen out there went out fishing in the afternoon, and as they were rushing back to get to the island to light the light, because it was later than, they didn't plan well. They were hurrying to get back. And as they did that, the light came on by itself, and nobody was on the island. So they never figured that one out.
That is pretty creepy.
You know what? It's been another fast hour.
Sure has.
It's not over yet.
Well, just about. We only got like 2 minutes left.
Oh.
So,
Jeremy, what can you tell us real quickly? Please tell us about your tours.
Oh,
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Good idea. Yeah. I co-lead some walking tours at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse in Newcastle, New Hampshire. If people want to look up the information, go to portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. And we have what we call haunted tours in the evening. We have a lot of ghost stories at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse and Fort Constitution, which is right next to it. Ron Kolek of New England Ghost Project and I lead these tours. September 6th is the next night. I know the 7 p.m. tours are sold out, but then we have 2 more tours. The last one ends at midnight. They're 90-minute walking tours. It all benefits the care of the 2 local lighthouses. And we also have a full ghost hunt on September 27th.
That's fun. I've been on that.
We're going to have some special guests on that, and it's really exciting. It'll be a full investigation for like 5 hours.
Can we mention that special guest?
Yes, we can.
Dave Parsons.
Yeah.
He's been a guest
Steve Parsons
on our
from
show
the UK.
3
Yes.
times.
Three times.
3
Yeah.
times.
That's right.
I got to meet him myself, and he's a fascinating guy, so I'm
He
really
is.
looking forward
Yes,
to that.
Nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Nice guy.
Yeah.
And I understand right now, every Sunday, the lighthouse is open for.
This
tour.
is right. Yeah, Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse open every Sunday, 1 to 5 p.m. And again, portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. Children have to be 42 inches tall to go up the stairs, go to the top of the lighthouse. We ask for a suggested donation, $4 for adults, 2 for children. And it's a fun time, and it's the best view in the New Hampshire Seacoast region.
It is. It's interesting. I went down there, I think it was last year.
Uh-huh.
That was the first time I met you, actually.
Yeah.
I just happened to stop by and said, "Hey, the lighthouse is open. Let's go in." So,
Yeah.
and it was pretty cool.
I think it's a great family outing, so we get
Yeah.
a lot of kids, a lot of families.
Yeah.
Historic, very interesting. How many more minutes we have left, Willie? 1?
Technically none, but
Well, can you squeeze
not
in
many.
buried treasure at Lunging Island or White Island or whatever?
Oh, well, there's
going
so
on
many.
there?
I don't know if we have time to get into Blackbeard, all the Blackbeard stories in the Isles of Shoals, but yeah, associated with various islands out there. They still haven't found treasure that I'm aware of, but they've tried. And White Island seems to have a ghost that was sighted by some of the Coast Guard lightkeepers there on that island, and a woman in white who would warn people in times of storms and things like that.
That's
so.
really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice. All right,
right.
then. Well,
I
we
guess
squeezed
that-
in as much as we possibly
we
could.
did, and it's always great to have you here, Jeremy. We
Thank you so
really
much,
appreciate
Jeremy.
you
You're very welcome.
Very interesting.
rescheduling yourself and coming in this week. And,
It's my pleasure, and it's always a pleasure. I really enjoy coming, so thank you.
and so I guess that's it for Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience for this week. And we will be back.
And you all have a good evening, and thank you for listening.